All right, well, welcome to everyone. We're so excited to have you all here today. Um, Before we jump into talking about the book and questions, I'm just going to introduce Andrew real quick. So Andrew Houvouras is a BCBA and the director of experiential training at Florida Institute of Technology School of Behavior Analysis. He has over 17 years of experience in public schools and extensive experience in residential treatment. Um, Andrew specializes in ABA to reduce problem behaviors, teach adaptive skills, and create systemic change. Andrew is an avid surfer and enjoys spending time outdoors with his two sons and his French bulldog. Um, Andrew, we're so happy to have you.
Maddie, thanks a ton. I really appreciate you guys putting this together.
Yes. Um, so let's start out. Obviously, we're here to talk about your book, The Lives of the Silent. And you start out by talking about how the silent were your greatest teachers. Uh,
Yeah.
your you go throughout the book experiences with different clients, but you touch on a individual that you had experience with as a teenager when you were working with Ronnie, who was a young man with autism.
Yeah.
Can you tell us about kind of those early moments when you
Sure.
realized that you were learning a lot?
Yeah. It just happened to be kind of fortuitous. In the book, I detailed a little bit in the introduction. My father was a Catholic school principal. My mother was a Catholic school art teacher, and the parents of a young man with autism named Ronnie wanted their son to receive a Catholic education. And all the principals at the time, if you said autistic, people thought you said artistic and asked you what your child painted. And so my father said of the numerous principals they went to, they said, well, we don't think we can serve him. And my father said, we'll try. And so my brothers and I were teenagers at the time. And it was actually my identical twin brother who was the first person in our family to start working with him. We were in the middle of sports seasons. And so my older brother and I were finishing our sports seasons. And so my twin brother was done with his. And so he was the first person who started working for the family. And, I hear a lot of stories about how people fall into autism or discover it by accident. Mine was the exact opposite. I had this beautiful introduction to a family who was, gosh, loving and kind and active. And he was the oldest of four children. And, the dad was and mom were both very educated, very devoted and dedicated to their family. They had extra help. They went to Miami of Ohio every year and every couple of years and would find an outstanding special education teacher and bring them in and have them live with them. And that person would attend school with them, as that kind of instructional assistant, if you will, but served in a really significant capacity in Ronnie's life. And it was just an amazing experience. Ronnie was a swimmer and he rollerbladed and he skis back Black Diamond slopes with his family every year when they go skiing, and he can ride a bicycle and what have you. And yet he's spoken kind of disjointed three and four word sentences. And he was large physically, but gentle and sweet and funny. Even though the bulk of the time you spent with him, he barely said a few words other than when he periodically wanted to request something. And so it was this just beautiful introduction into autism back when a lot of people didn't do we're talking about autism. There weren't a lot of books out there. There were journals, but even the journals back then, if you look at them now, we're talking about the person's cognitive abilities, which they did refer to mental retardation at the time. And autism was not kind of even in our behavioral world, it wasn't talked about a lot. And so it wasn't diagnosed as much as the public wasn't as aware. And so it was just a really neat time. Shortly after my twin brother started, when sports season ended, my older brother and I started as well, and I fell in love with it. I knew it was kind of the thing I wanted to do with my life. I didn't know how I was going to remain kind of doing that, but I knew that in some way I would continue to be serving people. in the spectrum. It was, it wasn't called the spectrum back then, but it was just a wonderful introduction. We did so many things together. I look back on it, it was almost a magical time in my life. My youth was a almost, I don't want to say it's idyllic. We had difficulties, but it was really neat, and that was really a wonderful introduction into the life, this life that's become mine, right? And again, I didn't know. I thought I was going to be a psychologist forever, but that being said, it was just I couldn't have asked for a better beginning into the field. It kind of funny too. I think one of the people who's with us today is a friend of mine, and he actually was one of the special educators who came in after I went off to college to live with them, and he actually became a behavior analyst and has been working in public schools for years. And our lives are completely paralleled and stuff. And I think he has the same strong feelings I do about the family. They're very near and dear to our heart because um, they proved to me they used an experimental psychologist to work with their son, but everything was marked by concern and love. I mean, those were the overriding motivators was family and love and kindness, and it was just a great experience.
That sounds absolutely amazing. And so wonderful that you had such a young introduction to this world that we all live in.
Yeah. It was a fun introduction too, and I tell people, I say this in the book, but I don't know that I did the best job of explaining it. What a joy I've taken from the experiences. And I'll just give you an example. The family were huge Miami Dolphin fans. And we continued to work with the family from 16, 17, 18, 19. And I remember being 18 years old and a senior in high school. And the father was an attorney. And again, there were four children in the family. And this Ronnie was the oldest of the four children. And we would work on Saturdays and Sundays when the special educators would go off and do their own thing, go on dates and movies and whatever it is they needed to do. We were kind of their relief, right? They called us peer companions. And Dad looked at me and said, Andrew, I got a big trial this week, and there's a 4 o'clock football game today, and the other kids are too young to go. So if you don't mind, can you work late today instead? And I've got the car, it was a big suburban truck. I've got the car gassed up for you. Here's money for concessions. Would you call your friends and take Ronnie to the Miami Dolphin football game? And it would be Ronnie and two or three of our friends or my brothers and I sitting in a Miami Dolphins football game having the time of our lives, And Ronnie was real into the game. Always, he's a huge Dolphins fan. Would sing the songs and do the cheers and what have you. So it was great. It was great.
I love that so much. So you talked a little bit about diagnosis, specifically autism, but within the book, you chose to veer away from clinical labels and just talk about the silent. Why was that choice so important to you?
Um, with a growing number of people diagnosed in the spectrum, I think it's important that it's increased awareness. At the same time, I think, especially if you look at American culture uh, in particular, you see when a person is affixed with a label, that the label kind of sticks. And the problem with labels is they're fairly limiting. They certainly just they may describe an aspect of a person, but they never truly describe the person. And there's this idea I learned many years ago in behavior analysis. Again, the nominal fallacy, right? You don't explain a phenomenon by naming it. Now, sometimes that diagnosis is important. I'm not discounting that. Sometimes when people get a diagnosis of autism, of ADHD, of obsessive compulsive disorder, of depression, it's their initial foray into then pursuing treatment. But the label itself, I think, can be stigmatizing, and we only need to look at mental retardation, for example, as a label that stuck and became a pejorative term. So here you are, Maddie, and you're a person they diagnosed with mental retardation, and you're working your tail off to learn. You're involved in your life as you can. You're pursuing the things you want to pursue. That's how people refer to you. And then when I'm making fun of my friend, I say, "Oh, that person's retarded." And it's used as a slur, if you will. And so I thought it was important I do think it's important to sometimes move away from labels because I think they're fairly limiting, and uh, I think we're much bigger than the labels that are kind of ascribed to us sometimes.
Absolutely. And I think it shows a lot of your care in your decision to try, I mean, to try to eliminate those labels and see the humanity behind your clients.
Well, that's because I'm truly not a behavior analyst. I'm a humanist at heart. I wanted to be Carl Rogers. I wanted to be a psychologist and I wanted to sit down and listen to people in therapy talk. And I found out in graduate school I was really bad at it. But fortunately, there was a book by Carl Rogers I read, and it had a chapter where he had a dialogue with B.F. Skinner. They used to go around to colleges having kind of these cool debates with each other. And I came across the chapters on Skinner, and I thought, this is how I think. This is how I see the world. And things started to make sense for me. And then, of course, when you move into a behavioral perspective, you're super concerned with what you see before you and what you hear. You're not nearly as concerned with the labels. I think sometimes people think we're dismissive of diagnosis versus I think we generally want to understand the whole person and see who the person is, right?
Absolutely. So let's kind of talk about some of these people that you talk about in the book. Like I said, it's a collection of stories about individual clients. And obviously names are changed and things like
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
But um,
That was the hardest part of writing it, Maddie, was it was when I wrote it, I did initially use their names because it was that I used their names often. It's how I remembered them. But it was still confidentiality is such an important piece of a helping profession that it was very intentional. And I really thank the team, the editing team, to help me with it, to remove details that could have had people identify the people in the book, even though several of them, one of their inspirations for writing it, one of their reasons for writing it was I found out that one of the people in the book had passed away. And as I know several of them had, and that was, okay, there was no cell phones back then. There are no pictures in existence. There's probably a dozen people alive now who remember them, or two, in a meaningful way. I didn't think their lives should be lost to history. I thought they should be kind of immortalized, if you will.
I love that so much. Yeah, it makes me think of I have also lost some clients and they absolutely deserve to be remembered.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah,
yeah. So let's talk about Artie.
yeah.
So to those most of you who have not read the book, Artie spent 70 years in institutions. But you describe some of these beautiful moments, like the first time that he was at a beach when he was 81. What did Artie teach you about finding joy and maintaining dignity?
Um, so I'm claustrophobic, and one of the things that frightens me the most is jail. And one of the things that if you ever set foot in old institutions, it will remind you of is a jail. And so to me, that would be like hell on earth, right? You're robbed of choice, you're kind of warehoused. As I detail in the book and some of the things I talk with some of our mutual friends about, there wasn't active rehabilitation and treatment back then. Um, so it's something, to be frank, that personally frightens me. And then you meet this gentleman, Artie, who wasn't 5 feet tall. And at the time I met him, he was 81 years old. And you think that in 1918, he went into an institution, and in 1988, he moves out. Um, I think any of us who just consider that fact alone, almost makes him a personal hero, right? Where you go, he withstood and persevered 70 years. It just was mind-boggling. The other thing I would think, but I think you start to think in the way we do in self-talk and go, gosh, if that was me, I would have lost all hope and I would be depressed and down. And he seemed so incredibly curious. And I think that's probably emanated from the fact that there was some limited things he had seen in his life, being housed in the same place and the same walls and what have you, the same general area. And I'm sure they went to the community periodically, but to be able to walk with him in the park daily, to be able to take him to the local malls, to be able to take him to the beach, which is a big part of my life. Um, it's hard to describe how meaningful it was to me, even back then as a young guy, where you don't have a ton of perspective and a ton of life to rely on to go. I've done this every day as a guy. I've been to the beach every weekend pretty much with my parents when we were kids. After on Saturdays and Sundays after church, we would go to the beach all the time. We spent so much time at the beach. And here he is, he's 81 and he's taking his first steps ever on a beach. It was even back then as a kid, it kind of blew me away. And then the more I think about it, it makes me tear up. It makes me happy, all those things at once, because again, he had this beautiful curiosity. He would sit and stare at things for minutes and minutes on end and really seem to attend to things. Those first steps, and I try to describe them. And I don't know, as an author, you want to describe things. He took such gingerly steps because he had never been in sand before, not to that extent, right? So it was an amazing trip with some amazing people, and I was super lucky to be a part of it. And the fact that he would observe a lot. I think it's kind of neat too. Is at that time I was kind of figuring out I wasn't good at psychology. I was going to become a behavior analyst. I'm hanging out with Artie, and everywhere we'd go to the park, he'd sit down and look at the pigeons, and he loved to feed the ducks and the pigeons and things of this nature. And he seemed to take such great joy in it, and he would smile. And again, he was non-vocal. I never heard him, and to the greatest extent I know, he never uttered a single word. He seemed to take great pleasure in things that many people his age who are retired, and that's what we considered him at the home, retired. He seemed to take great joy in it, and it made me. I know we all work towards trying to understand where we are emotionally and whatever, but it made it hard for me to get down when I thought of all the opportunities I have and the things that I'm able to do. And here was this guy locked away for 70 years, and he's still just learning to explore and see some of the parts of the world that are out there. And that was always very inspirational to me, even when I was younger.
Yeah, that sounds absolutely incredible. And you used the great word inspirational to be a part of. So
Yeah.
um, let's pivot to David. So with David's story, a lot of people kind of missed something that direct care staff had figured out. So they figured
Yeah.
out that making eye contact triggered his behavior.
Yeah.
Uh, what does that teach us?
To give away a little bit for some of the people who are here who may be interested in the book or going to read the book, David's behavior was tearing clothing, both his own and other people's. And so it was for the first time I ever met him, and I describe it, he tore the shirt right off my body. We were trying to figure it out. And so I'm brand new I'm come back to Florida from West Virginia, where I was in graduate school. I get my first job as residential treatment center, working, in a behavioral capacity. And one of my assigned clients is David, and they've been trying to figure out for the better part of 6 to 7 months why he was tearing his own clothing, which had stopped, by the way, at the time I worked with him. And for others, at the time I worked with him, he was only tearing other people's clothing. And we did very detailed assessment work. We completed screening tools, which is normal for a behavior analyst. We did detailed observations and took ABC data, antecedent behavior consequence data, very normal for a behavior analyst. We spent hours with him, the other behavior analysts and I. We even did a functional analysis, a very detailed systematic assessment. We never found the answer. And then I just happened to be at the group home one day, and one of the staff sat down and explained, here's what we do and why we do it. And here's this person getting paid very little per hour to do very difficult work. Again, a direct care staff is the equivalent of what we now call an RBT, or registered behavior technician. It's a person who is largely implementing programs and doing all the really hard, difficult work with clients day in and day out. And she laid it out for me, and we went ahead and tested that. The staff were spot on, and it resulted in, when we stopped talking and started listening to the staff, within 2 months, he pretty much completely stopped tearing. I tell a story about when it was evoked under an extremely stressful situation one time, but by and large, completely stopped tearing clothing, was able to move back to his home, was able to attend a local high school on his own. There's a story about a thing that happened that you would never have predicted based upon what we saw and what have you with his independence. It was just amazing. And it was really one of these initial successes you have. Again, people talk about falling into the field. You have these successes when you listen. And I think if we're smart and don't go, "Hey, great job. I did a great job on that case." You go, "I'm so glad I didn't have an ego to where I would sit back and listen to someone who didn't have the formal education, who didn't have the behavior analytic knowledge, who wasn't versed in psychology, who can just sit there and spell everything out for you. And if you connect the dots, you get the correct picture painted for you." So it was amazing. And again, I think part of the challenge that what I write, and I talked about some of their behavior because that's again, so certain things you remember. David was fun. He was super fun. I mean, it already was as well. It's hard to say how much joy I have derived from my day-to-day work now for decades. It's been a joyous ride. Yeah, there were difficult moments, but those were moments. They weren't the minutes and the hours, even though they're quite were often very enjoyable. So. Yeah, I think we just need to listen. Behavior analysis, I think because we're very solution oriented, because we are not as into process as our friends in psychology and counseling, in other clinical fields, because again, we are very solution driven. I think there are times we have to check ourselves and make sure we're not so solution driven that we forget to listen to the people, especially the people who have that day-to-day contact with our clients.
Let's kind of dive into that a little bit deeper. You described yourself as a behavior analyst second, but a humanist first.
Yeah.
Um, let's talk a little bit about how the scientific approach, while we need to be careful not to dive too deep into being so solution oriented, but how is that also the most humanist approach?
Yeah, behavioral science. Right now, I think we're undergoing this current kind of shift in behavior science where we're using words like kind in front of extinction, and compassion in front of care, and progressive in front of this type of assessment or that type of assessment, and that's all well and good. I don't have any problem with us describing our methods as such because as a science it can sometimes be thought that we're mechanistic, that we're cold and sterile, and that's the exact opposite. We by and large, if you would interview most behavior analysts, they go into the field for the exact same reason that a psychologist or a counselor or a social worker does. The most popular thing you get back when you interview people about why did you get into this? I wanted to help people. And again, empathy, as we all know, is learned, right? And so maybe, and I think we're getting there. I think we're continuing. Behavior science has always been empathic. I think now we're making sure we talk about it. You can be a humanist and demonstrate unconditional positive regard for Maddie. That also means you're not going to attribute Maddie's behavior to something that happened 17 years ago one time, right? We understand that that is an important, significant event in the environment, but there are other factors too we can identify to help explain behavior. Being a humanist means, again, an unconditional positive regard means I regard you as important, your life as important, who you are as important. And in behavior science, I care so much about Maddie. I'm going to offer you an evidence-based solution. I'm not going to throw spaghetti against the wall and hope it sticks. I'm not going to put you in harm's way and put you in the position of facing an intervention that is harmful or hurtful or that can hurt you potentially. As some people will try anything to help people in order to produce the results. We're going to be deliberate about it. We're going to be patient. I think the hardest part for us as a science and being humanists is we're behavior analysts are often ready to fight the battle for a month, 6 months, a year, 2 years, knowing it takes a long time sometimes to generate behavior change. And we're not going to compromise. And I think that again, we're going to stay to the course. And I know people want easy solutions, simple solutions to complex problems. That's very true in the autism world. And so we're battling against people who said, "Oh, I can offer you this cure." or this simple thing caused your child's autism. And I think that's a problem in and of itself. I think we can continue to be humanists by demonstrating empathy, by using some of the tools they do teach in clinical fields that came from clinical psychology, social work, mental health counseling. The way they talk to people is beautiful. And if anybody wants a really vivid example of it, read the work of Glenn Latham. Glenn Latham's wording is particularly powerful for anyone who wants to understand how you talk to a child, how you talk to a parent, how you talk to another adult, right? It's this constant regard for them, and you think before you speak, and you choose your words carefully, and you try not to get into emotional arguments. So I don't think humanism and behavior analysis are incompatible at all.
Yeah. And you talked both in the book and in your answer there about exploitation and how there are approaches out there that unfortunately are just those quick fixes that are not effective. You
Mhm.
talked in the book about facilitated communication.
Yeah.
Um, how can people, uh, thinking specifically about those families, those loved ones, how can they kind of approach these quick fix it like
I think we need professionals, and I say this in all honesty, who not just behavior analysts. I think we need to make sure we are embracing this empathic kindness, the especially the deliberate labeling of it, right? This deliberate talking about it, which is great. I think other fields need to take some of our skepticism. And I am unabashed in telling parents when I speak to parents. I did this at a big talk I did last year in Egypt, and I do it with my supervisees every term. I say, you guys, if you see something on the news and it says it's a breakthrough for people with autism, it's not a breakthrough. I said breakthroughs don't happen in a day, and everyone wants the miracle. Everyone wants to take the blue or the red pill, and everything's better. And that's again, that's not a knock on medicine either. That's just we want these really quick solutions. And behavior analysis never promises that. We say, okay, let's roll up our sleeves, let's get our hands dirty, and we can improve this behavior, which is just a small part of the bigger piece that is a person's life. But sometimes that's a really important piece, right? It's the thing that the parents want. It's the thing that the person wants, right? It's the thing that's bringing them harm or disrupting the family milieu or what have you. And I think we need to make sure we are deliberate that uh, there are things that work, and the things that work have stuck the test of time. And what happens? They're sold a bill of goods, and it's always comes with pedigree and degrees and very expensive hourly fees and promises of better days to come. And I believe we should be purveyors of hope. But I think we got to let parents know, be conscientious. There are going to be people who prey on you. And I would hope our autism advocates, my friends in that realm, are probably pretty good about that too, telling people, hey, there is no easy fix. You can have, and I don't have no problem saying this, you can have a Bobby Kennedy who comes in and says he's going to find a cure for the cause of autism by September of this year when it's been being researched for decades, and it's not going to happen. And you have to be deliberate. I got asked that question actually by a parent at a game who was aware of what I did. Said, "Do you think find a cause for ASD? Bobby will find a cause for ASD by September." I said, "There's no chance that will happen." I said, "I would bet every dollar I have that would never happen." So like, I think we just have to keep trying to hope that the world continues to pursue some education, and that the people who are in important roles, autism advocates, psychologists, behavior analysts, speech language pathologists, all understand how important their jobs are, and that together we can help people lead the lives they want to live, and not worry about whether you're curing something that doesn't need cured anyway. That's a whole story for another day.
yeah. Well, and I think, part of that is individualized treatment, right? A big part
Yes,
of that.
yes,
And you talked about there's two questions here. There's a tangent question and then there's a real question. You talk about Mr. A number one, and I
yeah.
would like to know the story behind that name. And also, um, you talk about how um he had individualized treatment and then lost progress when
Yeah.
that individual piece was
Yeah.
taken away.
It was yeah. He absolutely one of my favorite human beings to have graced who graces this earth. I don't know ever what happens to him now, as well as many of the other people who are a little bit younger who were portrayed in the book. But individualized treatment, assessment and treatment is everything. I think that's one of the things I love about behavior analysis. It is, again, I think it gets into this humanistic idea. Gosh, I seem like I'm talking about humanism this whole time. This unconditional positive regard. I regard you so highly that what worked with Caitlin may not work with you. So I'm going to do my best to provide you individual assessment. I'm going to try to find out your unique needs, your unique wants, what you prefer, how we approach you, what is in your environment. We use this term environment, and for our guests who are not behavior analysts, like I think my mother's here, although she's had to hear me talk a billion times, the environment doesn't just include the things that are around us. It includes those things that are within us. Those things are important. We think biology and genetics and learning histories are important, right? We can't escape those things. But I think we care so much about people that we understand that, again, what works for one person may not work for another. His case was disheartening because he made such incredible progress. And I'm talking about a person who was like, you guys remember the Tasmanian devil? He used to spin around in rec rooms and cartoons. He would just raise havoc when he would come in when things didn't go his way and what have you. And he made such remarkable progress. Other than asking me, which is in the book, 7,500 times on a plane ride, are we there yet? That type of thing. The death by repetition may be possible, but we did an experiment on this plane ride, and I'm still alive, so it didn't work. He did so well, and to take him to a place where we said, here's what works. We know exactly what works with him. The behavior plan was so refined. I think we had it down to like 3 pages. Everything about him could have been memorized in half a day. And we went there. It was a friend of mine, my colleague and longtime friend Frank, who was the group home manager. We both went with him to his home to do training and to be with him the first 8 days that he was going back home. And it was around the sixth day, I think, when the psychologist came in and said, "Well, we don't do that. We're a reality therapy group home." And this kid really was fantasy based and really had all kinds of things. He was young. He had some intellectual disabilities. He loved fantasy, and that's primarily what he talked about in his repetitive conversations. To hit him over the head with reality would be like taking a 2x4 up someone's head. It was insensitive. It wasn't individualized. It wasn't what we know worked. And to be frank, he came to us because nothing anybody did in the place where he lived worked with him. Nothing. And we found it, and we found it fairly easily. And if they had simply listened to him, it's simply to him. If they had simply listened to him, number one, but listened to us, he would have flourished where he was at. He would have flourished. And he ended up going back into residential treatment and having to leave his home and move far away again to receive services because his behaviors had returned. They tend to, right? If we don't have maintenance, if we don't have people following the plan. He he he's the saddest story, and at the same time, every time I think about him, it's this dual feeling of sadness and happiness because no one's ever made me laugh the way he has. His first of all, calling me Mr. A number one because both our names, first names started with A. You can extrapolate from there if you want to, which is fine. To the fact that I was number two and he had to be number one never made me stop laughing. He referred to his teacher as princess all the time. And you'd say, yeah, it's Miss so and so, princess. He never stopped. When he would hit you, he would say he was a Mighty Morphin Power Ranger. There was all this fantasy superhero magic stuff laced in there. He talked incessantly. Now, this is me saying that, who's been talking with you and not letting you get a word in edgewise. Maddie, he was just so enjoyable. And I so wanted him to succeed. It's one of these things, and I think all of us probably who deal with human beings, whether it's students as for teachers or clients if you serve in other helping professions, there's a piece of you I think that learns quickly. We all get very attached to our clients. you want to not see them again. You want to know that there's a better world out there for them that doesn't require the presence of specialized behavior help, right? And he was on his way. He was well on his way. And he should have had that chance. And systems, of course, fail children, especially when they're cookie cutter, especially when they think that the square peg is going to fit in the round hole. It just doesn't. So,
Yeah. That I mean that's truly heartbreaking
mhm.
to hear. And and I know that there are a lot of differences between the institutionalized world that that you were working in at that time versus what is happening now. Um, what gives you hope about the current state?
Yeah. There's an economic reason behind some of this, and then there's, of course, greater public awareness. There's the massive work that behavior analysts have helped with insurance reform. It is much easier for people to get services. The Over time, of course, people are more educated about the diversity of disabilities that are out there. This is why the idea of not talking about diversity is just maddening for me. They're more aware of the diversity of disabilities. So Maddie doesn't walk into the clinic and we slap her with she can't perform on the intellectual test, so we slap a label on her as mentally retarded and we're good to go. Um, the idea that people are aware of that people learn differently, that there are numerous ways to treat different conditions, from behavior analytic means to certain medications work with certain populations really well to certain therapies, work pretty fairly well with certain conditions as well. I think what gives me hope is that education is the first thing that gives me hope. When the programs that are out there producing professionals, by and large, I think are doing better and better. The expansion of our field has given me both caution and great hope, but mostly great hope that when I was certified, I'm the 515th certificate in the world. I think one of our friends and colleagues, Maddie's now at 70,000, one of our students we've had. It's amazing. And there's 100,000 plus RBTs. We are creating the ability for people to pursue jobs in helping professions. And maybe some of these RBTs go up and become special education teachers and speech language pathologists. But it's no longer a fringe. It's no longer sheltered into very small academic circles. That gives me hope, that parents know that they can typically go into a public school system, get their child identified early, and start getting, whether it's occupational therapy or speech language pathology and or behavioral health, they can access services at an earlier age. There's a piece of me, and this is not, I hope it doesn't come across cross. I somewhat lament that there are the people that I worked with who lived in institutions I cared about deeply. They were amazing to me. Their resilience, the fact that again, Artie was the ultimate example, but there are two or three other guys, Robert and Harry, who I read about, who spent decades in institutions from the time they were young to the time they were well into adulthood. And I really enjoyed them and thinking about their struggle and sitting around with my colleagues talking about what we thought would happen and what have you. There's a few little gems in the book about that where we heard a client who did speak periodically repeat something, and we found out that the actual name of his doctor was in the institution was what he was saying, which was fascinating to us. But I'm happier though that the people who touched my life, who led me down this path to become a behavior analyst, they largely don't exist because people can access services. They can get help earlier. We have so many. Back when I was first a behavior analyst, you didn't have a center for early intervention. You worked with whoever came through your door, and that was typically because you were in a university where that offered help for people with severe problem behavior, or you worked in residential treatment, either for adults who lived there or children who lived there where the school and the home could not support them. That's not the case anymore, and that gives me a lot of hope that we're a much more aware society. And again, even media is lovely to portray people in their human way, for people to understand that being on the spectrum does not mean you don't have lust, love, sexual ideas in your head, right? That you have ideas about engaging in intimate reciprocal relationships. I think we treated people with disabilities in the past too, especially my classroom institutions, one like plants. They were basically watered and fed. And the other thing that happened was we treated them like children, right? And I think nowadays we know that that's just not the case. And some of these shows show that you can have a disability and still have desires and you still may want to pursue a particular career, and there are people you like and there are people you don't like, right? And that they have agency to determine their destiny. Again, I think one of the things I try to explain to my younger students is those of us who've been in the field have always advocated for the agency of our clients to make their own determinations, and a lot of our younger behavior analysts think that that's something that's new. It's newer that we're talking about it more openly now, so everyone is educated in that matter. So I have a lot of hope about the progression of fields, the progression of special education, and what have you. I wouldn't be lying if I didn't say when I started writing the book is a lot different than how I feel now. Because I'm very worried because science and education are absolutely devalued. You have people running, and I have no problem saying it, but Bobby Kennedy I mentioned, who has no business running the agency he runs, and that woman running the Department of Education who's not an educator. What gives me hope is if we have a society where we take a medical expert and that medical expert's put in charge of health and human services, where a long-term educator is put in charge of the Department of Education, that our school boards are composed of a mix of people who adequately represent the community and no special interests. Those type of things, I think, continue to be needed. And I think we just need to stick to our guns. We can't deviate from the idea that people um, deserve individualized assessment and intervention. People deserve services. Parents don't need to go broke trying to provide services for their children. So insurance forms continue to need it, and licensure, of course, is a huge issue and that needs to be dealt with in Florida. We're the first state to certify, and we're right now, I think there are 29 or 30 states that are licensed, and we're not one of them. We need licensure. It protects clients. The moves to protect clients have been huge, and that those are the things that make me very happy. But again, I'm a little less optimistic than I was when I started writing this because things have changed and things need to go change the other way, where we are again supporting people with disabilities and supporting the services that they need in order to again realize the kind of the American dream, if you will.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Um, so we have about 12 minutes left, and we're gonna go to some audience questions. So if you have questions, please put them in the Q&A. But I do remember some conversations internally at ABA Tech where you had a very specific idea for the cover of this book. Can you explain what the story behind the shoes and
Yeah.
why that was so important to you?
Yeah. So the I'm going to kind of give it away a little bit, but Artie wore white sneakers. Again, he had a very short shuffle. He tended to wear jeans and white sneakers. And while I won't give away everything, he every night before bed he would put his white sneakers underneath his bed every single night without fail. And I have a theory that I'll let go in the book about it, but it became really important to me because he was the first person I wrote about. The first two persons he was one of the first two people I wrote about when I thought this is an idea that I wanted to pursue. And um, I worked with him a lot. He was when I was working initially, started working at the group home when I went to graduate school. He was the first client assigned to me, the group home, and so he was oftentimes I'd spend we did 8 hour shifts, and some of these things that behavior house do where you work 2 or 3 hours and then switch clients, we didn't do that back then. You were 8 hours with whoever you were assigned to, and I was often assigned to him, and so he often wore white sneakers, and so he passed away when I was leaving graduate school, and so kind of as a homage to him. I've continued to wear white sneakers largely at conferences. And I've had guys tell me, why are you wearing dad shoes? Or, your shoe game never fits your outfits or what have you, which again, some things you keep private for a long time. There's no reason to keep it private. I just kind of did. It was just kind of my private homage to my friend. And I know I called my client my friend, but I cared deeply about him. And so the cover I wanted to represent again part of the there's the team that worked with me to do the cover did an amazing job because it's not easy to find or design an image of white shoes near bed and what have you. But when it came out, I couldn't believe it because it has the light, which is hopeful, the darkness that's in the background, and it has the white shoes, and so that just always is a constant way for me to remember him and remember his importance in my life.
I love that. And I'm gonna be on the lookout now for your white shoes at conferences. Um, I this is a really great question. Thank you for the person who asked this. Were there any specific stories that you wanted to include that didn't make it into the final draft of the book?
Um, several, several. In fact, one or two people that I'm close to um, said, "I'm sure you wrote about." We'll say Maddie. Some people who've known me for a few decades, some people I've been around a long time said, "Surely you wrote about Maddie in the book." And I'm like, "No, I didn't." Although part of the reason is the kind of the idea of contextual fit, and to do a total spoiler and something I've barely to discuss with the publishers here is that I'm actually working on a second book, and so some of the people who didn't um, fit better for another book I'm going to be working on, and it's going to be called the Space Between, and yeah, there were people who meant a lot, who've meant a ton to me, who did not get put in the book. I tried to do short stories for a few reasons, just to let everybody. I realized that especially younger generation gets things in 1.5 minute video sound bites. And so I thought if I wrote shorter stories, it would appeal to people, and especially if they were standalone. If I didn't constantly make references back and forth, because there's a lot of interplay between the people in the book that some people may not realize, and it was difficult to try to put everything together. So yes, there were people who got excluded, people who lived interesting lives, people I spent an absolute ton of time with. But I hope to tell how the story of how they affected my life in another book.
I can't wait to read that one. That's
Thanks.
going to be very
Thanks.
exciting.
Yeah.
Um, what was, aside from deciding what to include, what not to include, what was the biggest burden or the most challenging part of writing?
The hardest part probably was probably the idea of trying to convey again the joyous part of it because like with Mr. A number one, a person who goes back to their home and doesn't succeed and is put in the wrong program and has to go back into residential treatment. There's nothing that's not horribly sad about that. So I found myself sometimes as a writer being drawn to the emotional part. But I think sometimes, and that's the challenge, is it masked? And I address this in a little bit, just in a little small way. I can't tell you how rewarding and how much I've enjoyed being a behavior analyst. I've enjoyed going to work almost every day for most of my career. Now, are there days that I would rather be surfing and what have you? Yeah, yes, of course, I'm human. But by and large, the challenges that you see with children and adults and companies that you work with, athletes, whatever capacity you're working in, and the ability to try to find ways to help them that they endorse, that they consent to, that produces the change they want. I don't know how that's not exciting to anyone, and I get different strokes for different folks. The other thing that's hard to convey, people who do what all of us, many of the people in here do, always hear, "Oh, you're so patient." I'm not any more patient than any other human being, especially with people who aren't on my caseload, I don't think. But I do think the people we work with teach us an incredible amount of patience. And I don't think I articulated that well in the book at all. But I think part of the reason in staying calm and in storms and my ability in my life to kind of weather significant changes without suffering the way some of my loved ones and friends suffer is because of the massive amounts of inspiration I derive from my day-to-day work. And that I don't know that that's easy to convey in a book. So
Yeah, I can imagine that would be very challenging.
Yeah,
Um,
but I would argue writing's hard. I wrote Artie's chapter and JD's chapter, and it came out, to be frank, easy. And looked at it and I go, I can't believe I wrote that. And I'm serious. I look back, I'm like, did I actually write that? And then, but some of the other ones, they didn't come out nearly as easily. It was a lot of, and that's why the editing process and working with quality editors is great because they are helpful to ask a question and help you fill in a blank and what have you. So it was really rewarding too to work with the KeyPress team because they really helped fill in gaps that maybe I didn't see. You're definitely, everybody has biases, right? All of us do. And in writing, there's no different. You have incredible biases that you bring to the table, and it's great to have an editing team who's just going to be honest of, I think this needs taken out, maybe change this, that type of thing.
yeah. And having worked with some of our editors, they are wonderful.
Yeah.
So I'm glad that you had a good experience with that. With just our last few minutes, um, what would you say to someone who has read these stories and is maybe they were not in our field at all, or maybe they were on their way out of our field and they're feeling re-inspired. They want to um they want to dive into behavior analysis. What would
Yeah.
you say to that person?
I think if there's part of a theme throughout the book, it may be that being an astute observer and listener may it may not be the most important thing to a behavior analyst. It may be the most important thing to be a human being, right? Um, I think we go through life and we attain our expertise and we get busy with our schedules and we think about the things we want. And we forget that sometimes connections are simply spending time with other people. And this gets back, by the way, to a real, and I am the biggest B.F. Skinner fan. I've talked about Carl Rogers, I think, 3 or 4 times today. This gets back to watching old tapes of him in therapy where he would sit with clients for minutes on end until they finally spoke. That type of idea resonated with me as I was learning psychology and reading with my clients I was working with who responded exclusively to applied behavior analysis because that marked many of the moments. And I think, my mom's who's on here is a super wise person. And when we were younger, we used to ask her about miracles and stuff. And she said, sometimes people are looking for a burning bush or the waters to be parted or what have you. And I'm not saying exactly what she said, but this is what the kind of lesson she taught my brothers and I. But sometimes the smallest of things is a miracle. I actually had a priest that was our children's priest when I was little who taught us similar lessons. He said, "You guys, seeing's a miracle because not everybody sees, and hearing's a miracle because not everybody hears." And so I think when people read the book, you have to have no interest, I think, in behavioral science. I'm going to say, or even autism. I think to get something out of it. And truly, as a writer, that was one of my goals. Was I love behavior analysis. I love reading behavior analysis. But this book isn't a behavior analytic book. It's a book about relationships and moments, right? And so that's what I hope people take is that you know, there's a quote from Stephen King, who's one of my favorite. I read absolutely no fiction except Stephen King. And Stephen King in The Shawshank Redemption said, hope is a good thing, maybe the best of things, and a good thing never dies. And so that's the type of idea I hope I kind of conveyed. A friend of mine, Dr. Caitlin Goki, asked me, was the book inspired by Let Me Hear Your Voice by Catherine Maurice, one of the all-time famous books on autism, which also talked about ABA, that was written when I was in graduate school. One of my favorite books of all time, and I haven't opened it since 1995. I'd be lying if I said it wasn't hugely influenced by her writings and that type of idea that people have a voice. It doesn't always mean they're talking, right? And that's the idea. That's the idea I want to convey.
I love that so much. Well, thank you, Andrew, again for blessing us with your time today, with your book, with your experiences. It's been a pleasure to have you.
Maddie, thank you guys so much. I appreciate you putting this together.